Hello everyone, I'm Mellar21. Dungeons have been a staple of Zelda games ever since the original game in 1986. Although Zelda games often provide some of the most exciting and engaging overworlds in all of gaming, I think if I was to assert that the dungeons are the main event, you'd have a hard time rebuking me. Dungeons can really make or break a Zelda game, and yet almost every single game has its own array of both amazing and disappointing dungeons, and of course, everything in between. As many of you may know, my personal favourite Zelda game is Ocarina of Time, and in preparation for this list, I've been really thinking about how I feel about the various dungeons of the game. I was trying to think back to how I used to think about them when I was a kid, and I came to realise that playing randomisers has significantly changed the way I feel about most of the dungeons, which I suppose is understandable, but it also struck me that if I was to take that into account while ranking the best and worst, that's incredibly unfair. After all, as much fun as randomisers are, they aren't the way the game developers intended the game to be experienced. As such, I decided to discount my more recent experience of randomisers and just focus on how I used to feel about the dungeons. Making a tier list only out of their rankings as far as randomisers are concerned might be fun though, so maybe I'll create that list in the future. But in the meantime, let's check out my tier list for the dungeons of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Let's start at the end with Ganon's Castle. I do think that it provides a cool final challenge and a satisfying conclusion to the game, but I also feel that the theme feels kind of weak, not only because it attempts to combine the themes of all the temples so far in the game, but also because the forest trial doesn't have a forest theme, and the water trial doesn't have a water theme. I know why this is, but I always found it a little jarring. The last part where you go up the tower is awesome, but it's also too linear. It's not a terrible dungeon, but it goes in tier C for me. From the end to the beginning, the Deku Tree. I've always respected the Deku Tree for actually being a fun first dungeon that expertly introduces the world to a three-dimensional adventure by almost immediately having puzzles that make you fall and think in 3 dimensions. It also stays true to its theme for being inside a tree, feels genuine, and develops a strong atmosphere early on. Definitely an A-tier dungeon. On the flip side of this though, I do think the Ice Caverns is a terribly disappointing experience. Pretty much every room in this mini-dungeon is frustrating in some way, with annoying enemies like the Ice Keese and the Freezards. Plus, it's the only dungeon except Ganon's Castle that forces you to give up your healing items. Pretty much everything about this dungeon is frustrating, and it's the only dungeon you might have to go back into to get the blue fire. Easily F'd here. Bottom of the Well is a strange one for me, because if you play the game vanilla, you actually don't need to spend very much time in the well at all. I think it's a great shame, because overall I love the well. It has a strong theme and atmosphere, it's confusing, but not annoyingly so, and it really draws the player in. The boss, although not mechanically amazing, bookends the whole feel of the place with one of the most disturbing experiences in all of E-rated gaming. There is a lot going for the bottom of the well, but I feel like it belongs in B tier just purely because you can pop in, just do 2 rooms and the boss, and get out. On a similar subject, the Shadow Temple very much held a very similar kind of vibe and atmosphere that I really appreciate even to this day. The music, the visuals, the creepy backstory, and the constant reminders of not only the temple's spooky history, but the bloody past of all of Hyrule. It really feels like you're gradually descending into the very heart of evil, which is even further amplified by the boat, described as taking you to the other side. The fact the dungeon is incredibly linear never bothered me when I was younger, and if anything, further enhances the atmosphere of gradually walking deeper into Doom. On those merits, I really just have to give the Shadow Temple the top dubs with an S tier. Gerudo Training Grounds was one that I have to admit I really enjoyed when I first started playing Ocarina. I went in knowing that it was likely bonus content, and I really enjoyed and appreciated the way the dungeon tests what you've learned so far. Having said that, I did find the key room quite frustrating at times, and the final prize is little more than a spit in the face if I'm honest. Therefore, I give GTG a B tier rank. The other desert dungeon is the Spirit Temple. I have to say, I always appreciated the fact that you have to go through the two arms of the temple at different ages in the game. The temple has a symmetry to it in a way that I've always appreciated, and it doesn't feel forced. Although I'm not usually a fan of the desert motif, I have to admit that I love the Egyptian vibes that really ooze throughout the whole temple. The music does a lot to maintain this, and the temple does a lot to keep the player on their toes. Therefore, I feel the Spirit Temple earns its place in the A tier. Jabu's belly is problematic. I feel on paper, a lot of the mechanics in this dungeon are really great. So why do I dislike it? It has a very claustrophobic atmosphere throughout, some annoying enemies, and of course, Ruto, which is going to sour any dungeon. The mini-boss is one of the most annoying experiences of the game until you figure it out, and the aesthetic is definitely not for everyone. The final boss of the dungeon does elevate it in my eyes, but it still has to go in the B tier. So Dongo's Cavern is a great second dungeon. It's probably the dungeon in the game that is most like a classic adventure dungeon. It's well laid out, crisscrossing the central room on several occasions, and it provides a good mix of challenges for a still fairly green player. Having said this, as a kid, because it's such a good adventure dungeon, it always felt a bit of a grind and was very overlookable for me. On the merits of how I feel about the base game, I'd have to put this in the B tier. Now for the Fire Temple. I have to admit, I'm not always a fan of the fire and lava motif, but I have to say that the Fire Temple does a really good job of building and maintaining an atmosphere. It also sets up the boss early as a real threat that really helps set the mood. The overall design of the dungeon, with more levels than any other mapped dungeon, feels incredibly engaging and satisfying. Unfortunately, the puzzles are quite disappointing and don't really add much to the experience. Also, don't even get me started on that damn jump in the firewall room to get to the locked door. It really looks like you can't make it, and I don't know anyone who doesn't get stuck on that part of their first playthrough. As a result, it's another B tier dungeon. Now let's talk about the big one, the Water Temple. Oh man, what I forgot to say about this. The idea behind the Water Temple is incredible. The temple as a whole is incredibly well put together, forces the player to explore in a non-linear fashion, and shows off the three-dimensional aspect of Ocarina of Time better than any other temple. I never fully hated the Water Temple, because as annoying as it is to get lost and forget keys, and as slow as it is to equip and re-equip the damn boots over and over again, if you sit and really figure it out, it's not that hard, and god damn if it isn't satisfying to finally figure it out. I think if the boss of the temple was more fun, I would have given the Water Temple a B tier, but it just misses out and therefore lands in the C tier for me. And that leaves me with the Forest Temple. Anyone want to guess where this is going? I honestly love everything about this temple. I love the forest aesthetic, I love the haunted mansion vibe, and I absolutely love the music. It used to give me the creeps as a kid, even more than the Shadow Temple music. I love the way you explore the mansion, I love the twisting corridors concept, and I love the way the dungeon introduces you to the pose stealing the fire and making the elevator unusable. It creates a sense of suspense. I wonder what's down there. And the way the temple slowly seems to open up to the first-time player makes it an utter treat. When I started the Forest Temple as a kid, I already really liked the game, but I don't think I fully fell in love with the game until I had experienced the Forest Temple. It cannot go anywhere other than the S tier. And that's my list. Do you agree? Why don't you leave a comment? You can even subscribe while you're at it. there'll be more of this to come on YouTube. You can find me live on twitch.tv/Mellar21. But until next time, remember, it takes many nails to build a crib, but only one screw to fill it. See you next time.